So it's that time of year where we tend to start binging all of the Halloween films, the entire franchise. I know I do. I tend to start right around this time, the end of August, early September, and then all the way through October 31st. I tend to watch through the entire franchise two or three times just out of habit. But as I do that, I always tend to go down the YouTube rabbit hole of looking at people's ideas on Rob Zombie's Halloween and what people think of it, and start reading through the comments after I watch someone's video. And one of the things that I see the most is that Rob Zombie's Halloween is a shot for shot remake of the original 1978 classic. So I wanted to kind of make the opposite point here because I don't think anything about Rob Zombie's Halloween is a shot for shot remake. By any sense of the word, is it a shot for shot remake? So, just starting out, look at the opening of Rob Zombie's Halloween. We get to meet Michael's mother. We see the stepfather and the shitty person that he is and the relationship that he has with the rest of the family. We also see Judith Myers, and she's pretty shitty toward Michael as well. And I don't think she deserved what happened in Rob Zombie's Halloween. I don't think she was that terrible, but what happened. Then there's also something in there that sets this movie very far apart from that 78 classic. And that is we get to see Laurie Strode as a baby right in that opening scene. So they've already set the tone for this movie that Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister right off the bat, right? So in 78, we don't know that. 1978 film, all we know is that this little kid kills his sister. He spends 15 years in a sanitarium. He breaks out and he goes on this killing spree, killing babysitters. We don't know why. We don't understand his motive. And that's what made the movie scary. In Rob Zombie's Halloween, he tends to put a lot more meat on the bones in the story. Now, I don't agree with it. I'm not a fan of giving us too much backstory. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I don't care for so much backstory when it comes to Michael Myers. So I'm not saying that I like what Rob Zombie did, but I'm just saying what sets it apart and why it's not a shot-for-shot remake. So, we know right off the bat, Laurie Strode is the sister of Michael Myers. We see the family dynamic. And then we see what kind of sets Michael Myers off, that mistreatment of him as a child. But then we also see this little darker side of him where he's killing animals and that type of thing, but obviously set off by the trauma of the family. And then we get the scene where he kills Judith Myers, but then we also see him kill the stepfather, Ronnie. So nothing about that is shot for shot, obviously. Then, just for argument's sake, let's skip over the entire childhood sanitarium scene because that's not even a factor in the 1978 film. So if we just skip forward to where, after Michael Myers breaks out of the sanitarium and he goes back home and he gets the mask, an argument could be made that it's shot for shot in a sense, right? It's similar, right? Because there's that scene where Laurie is walking up the street and then Tommy Doyle's coming the other way and they run into each other. And that's pretty much, the same, and it's even shot in the same neighborhood as the original. So that's kind of the same, they have the same purpose. Laurie's going to the house to drop something off. In the original, it's a key. In the Rob Zombie remake from 2007, it is paperwork. Either way, they go to the mailbox. Michael Myers is standing behind the door. So it's very similar. And then an argument could be made about Laurie and Linda walking, from the school, and then Annie catches up to them. Then where it veers off is, Michael Myers had the car, and we get the speed kills thing from Annie. He stops the car. In Rob Zombie's remake, Michael is on foot. So it's a little bit different. It's similar, but it's not a shot-for-shot remake. And from that point on, very few things are similar. I mean, nothing about it. I mean, even the scene where Linda gets killed, the scene with Linda and Bob in the house is extremely different. You can even fast forward and, the tombstone. Remember, he takes the tombstone from the grave, and in 1978, he puts it on the bed, and then Annie spread out over the bed with the tombstone behind her. In this case, it's a little bit different. It's Linda, and it's in the attic of this house or basement. I think it's a basement. It's very different. So nothing about it is shot for shot whatsoever. Now, another thing I tend to see in the comments on a lot of videos, and I tend to read about in a lot of articles, is the grittiness of Rob Zombie's Halloween and why it's so different from 78. And we tend to make this comparison between the two, and that's the point I want to make. We tend to look at Rob Zombie's Halloween through the lens of 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween. And I don't think we can do that. We can't look at them through the same lens. It just doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like, for one, the 70s was a very different time, right? John Carpenter at that point is an adult. He's fresh out of college. He's making this horror movie called Halloween. And television is different at that time, right? The way they filmed for TV, the cameras were different, technology was different. And the upbringing in that time was different. And in the middle America that John Carpenter is trying to convey to us, that is a different thing. You know what I mean? That's a different lens. Then you look at Rob Zombie's Halloween, and he's giving us this gritty version of middle America, right? This trailer park redneck type of thing going on. A lot of cursing. You got Ronnie throwing shit all over the place, the family, and it's just a complete like mess. You know what I mean? And I think the thing is that Rob Zombie's upbringing and Carpenter's upbringing are vastly different. I think the way a filmmaker approaches, making a film and writing a film largely rests on their lived experiences. And I think those lived experiences tend to make their way onto the films in one way or another, whether we realize it or not. So, those lived experiences that John Carpenter had, and coming up in the '60s into the '70s, and then making this film, are not the same as what Rob Zombie experienced, right? So those two things are going to make their way into those two films, and I think that's one of the big reasons that we can't look at Halloween from 2007 through the exact same lens that we look at in '78. We tend to compare them so much, and I'm guilty of it too. In 2007, when this movie came out, I was constantly comparing it. First time I ever watched it, I was like, wow, this is so different. Why am I seeing, Myers as a child? Why can I see his face? Why do I know so much about his family? Why have we just spent 40 minutes watching him in the sanitarium? Why is the escape scene so long? Why is he so big? All these different things, I compared everything. I compared the camera angles, the shots. I compared how Annie dies in the original versus the fact that she doesn't die in 2007. You put all these things in the same lens and it doesn't work. You have to understand that these are two different people with two different writing styles, with two different directing styles, using different technology. And also, I think more importantly, two different life experiences making their way onto the camera and onto the film. And for that reason, I don't think we should be comparing the two films and trying to look at Zombie's movie through the lens of Carpenter's movie. They're vastly different. They're not the same thing. Now, yeah, some things, like I said earlier, are similar, and I think it was intentional. Like I said, Laurie walking and Tommy, walking up at the same time. I think they do that just so that we recognize what we're seeing. We're watching it and going, oh yeah, I remember this. I know exactly where we are in the story. And I think that's the purpose of him keeping certain things the same. The Linda and Bob scene, while it's different, we immediately recognize what's happening because it was similar to what happened in the other film, in the 1978 film. But he immediately kind of draws us away from that, right? He sets a scene that looks similar so that we know where we are in the film and we recognize it, and we recognize it as Halloween, as a Michael Myers film, but then he makes sure to pull us away from that pretty quickly, and that's intentional. But I just wanted to make the point that maybe we need to stop looking at these two movies through the exact same lens because it just doesn't work. I think that if you're going to watch Halloween 2007, it's best to try to not think about 1978. Don't think about Nick Castle as the shape. Don't think about Laurie Strode being Jamie Lee Curtis, or even harder to do, right? We look at Annie Brackett in '07 and we see Danielle Harris and we remember Jamie Lloyd from Halloween 4 and 5, right? So we have to try to erase that as well. I think if you're going to go into '07, you have to try to remove all of that. Remove everything that you know about the original film if you want to truly try to enjoy Rob Zombie's Halloween. That's the only way it's going to work. And if you could separate yourself from the '78 film, then there's a good chance you might actually like this movie. Now, I'm not saying it's the best movie. I'm not saying it's one of the great movies in the franchise. It absolutely is not. There's a million things wrong with it, and there's a million things that are great about it. And if, like I said, if you watch my channel for any period of time, then you know the one thing I hate the most is over-explaining Michael Myers, and that's what Rob Zombie did the most in this film. So that's one of the big gripes that I have with the '07 Halloween. But all of that said, if you can just remove everything that you know about the 1978 original and just try to watch this through its own lens and not compare it to the original, it's actually not that bad of a film. So that said, I want to know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know. Do you tend to watch Rob Zombie's Halloween and compare it to '78? Like I said, I've done it in the past, so I try not to do it now. Do you prefer Rob Zombie's Halloween and the over-explaining of Myers, or would you rather the mystique and the slow suspense of the original? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.